In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to annotate a text, and I will model it by going over a couple pages of the short story, The Lottery. Make sure that before you watch this video, you've printed out and read the handout on how to annotate a text, and you've read the PowerPoint presentation on authorial craft. If you were in class, you do not have to go back and reread that PowerPoint. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here we have Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. So right away, I would always look at the title of a reading, a novel, a poem, anything, because the title is going to hold a lot of meaning. So if you think about the lottery, traditionally the lottery has connotations of something that's positive. You win the lottery. It's life-changing usually. So already we have sort of a positive tone set to the story. So let's just start. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny with fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank around 10 o'clock. In some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 2nd. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow villagers to get home for noon dinner. So if we look at this first paragraph, we have a couple things that I would already start to annotate, right? So we have the morning was clear, sunny, fresh, warmth, summer-filled, right? Full summer day. So we have all these positive, bright images coming at you in the first introductory paragraph. Now we learn a little bit about the lottery itself, right? We know that it's done in other towns. Some towns it took 2 days, but in this particular town, there's only 300 people, so it takes less than 2 hours. What's interesting to note here, that I've kind of pointed out up here, is that it's kind of routine, right? It's done at 10 in the morning, so people can be home for dinner. So it's an activity that can fit between breakfast and dinner, and it's very routine. People go home after it and go to dinner. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounced the name Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders that rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers and sisters. So if we look at this paragraph here, right, the first two annotations, we have sort of like the order of the lottery, or the particulars of the lottery start to unfold, right? The children assembled first, of course. And what I noticed that was interesting here is that there's a feeling of liberty that sat uneasily on them. So school was recently over, and summer vacation started, but they don't have a feeling of freedom yet. So I thought, like, you think of the word choice, right? Liberty sat uneasily. We have a shifting slowly from the bright summer positive tone in the first paragraph. We have this little moment of unease, and that made me question why. Why are they not feeling free yet? And then Bobby Martin begins to stuff his pockets full of stones, and other boys follow his example, and they make a big pile of stones. So again, this is all connected to what the lottery is, and its particulars are starting to come out. The other thing I circled here, if you notice, we have names. So names are really important when you're looking at a text. Most often they hold some meaning. So we have Dickie Delacroix, but the villagers pronounce the name Delacroix. So we can assume that maybe perhaps the villagers don't have a respect for culture, right? They're very anglicizing the last name instead of pronouncing it correctly. And we'll see how that plays out in the rest of the story. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women wearing faded house dresses and sweaters came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women, standing by their husbands, began to call their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran laughing back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. So in this paragraph here, we're learning more about the town itself. We have a farming town, right? The men are speaking of planting, rain, tractors, and taxes. So we get this idea that it's a farming town, a community that relies on farming and the harvest. Then we have the women, the other thing I wanted to mention here was that their jokes are quiet, and that's over here, and they smiled rather than laughed. So we begin to see the attitude of the town surrounding this tradition here, correct? We have them muted, their jokes are very quiet, and they're smiling, not laughing. To me, it's a similar vibe you get at a funeral. If you're ever at a wake, you have this, people kind of want to smile or laugh, but everything's kind of muted. And that's the vibe I get from the men in this paragraph here. Now, last but not least, we have the women entering. And what I would like to note here is they're wearing faded house dresses and sweaters. So we get this idea of the women being at home, very traditional family structures. They're not wearing fancy clothes, but faded house dresses and sweaters. So we learn more about the dynamic between the husbands and wives. And we see that again at the bottom, which I've noted here, when Bobby Martin does not respond to his mother, but as soon as his father speaks up, he quickly falls in line. So we're seeing more about the town, more about the dynamic in this passage, and also the attitudes towards the lottery. And this is something, if I had more space, I would note in the margin here. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teen club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business. And people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool. And when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before 2 men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred the papers inside. So some important annotations I've made here was how the lottery was conducted. It was conducted in the same manner as square dances, the teen club, and the Halloween program. So again, this shows that it's kind of a public event, very routine, part of the fabric of the town, and dealt with this in the same manner as these other public events are dealt with. And then we have 2 names that I wanted to point out and kind of pointed them out here. We have Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves. So we have these contrasting images. Summers is more positive, and then we have Graves obviously, representing death or a possible death. So it's an interesting choice on the author's part, choosing these 2 names. And we'll see by the end of the story how the contrasting of Summers and Graves follows a trend in her writing style as well. The other thing that was really important is they come in carrying this wooden black box. And if we look over here, black, the color black, always look at colors. We look at seasons, we look at names, always look at colors. Colors are definitely very symbolic. Black is usually associated with something negative. It can be associated with death. But also, we have the black box in relation to the way the villagers deal with the box itself. They leave a space between themselves, as we see over here. and there's a hesitation for two men to help with the box. So that, in conjunction with the black wooden box, we have a negative undertone to the lottery already. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box, now resting on the stool, had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. So here we have a little bit of history of the box, and that it's been used so much that it's falling apart, and we find out that it has been happening for so long that no one in the village was alive before it was used, and in fact it was made from the preceding box. So you can really get the years of the lottery, and you can see just how long the lottery has been happening in this town. And I think what is most important about this paragraph is that it points towards the tradition. This is something that has been happening for years and years and years, and as we see in this part right here, the villagers value tradition, right? No one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. So even the black box perhaps represents a tradition that's not so great. They didn't want to upset it. So now it's your turn. I'd like you to finish reading the lottery and make sure you're annotating it as you go along. You can follow my model on certain things that I've annotated and try your best. This is officially your homework assignment, so once you're done this, you're going to pull out your lottery and start to read it and annotate it. And bring your annotated story to class tomorrow to collaborate with your peers. So we're going to start tomorrow's class by comparing your annotations to your peers, and then you'll be comparing them to my annotations. I'll give you a full copy of an annotated lottery, and we're going to compare them, and that's how we'll start class tomorrow. So remember, annotating is not easy. It is a skill that needs to be developed, so try your best. But what I think is important is that you try, because if you just look at this as some hard assignment and not try, you're really not going to hone that skill. Good luck, and I will see you in class tomorrow.